Kia ora, greetings folks. Thank you very much for turning out. Right Honourable Winston Peters, thank you for those words of both introduction and to remind the crowd why we're here. For those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet in my various appearances around the Northland area, thank you very much, and I see the children here tonight because what Winston and I are talking about goes to the heart of our quality of life, the heart of what's valuable for those of us who live in Northland, whether it's down in Mangawhai, Dargaville, or right up to Spirits Bay. A wee bit about myself before I go into the content of the speech, and there will be opportunities for question and answer. I was born and bred in Awanui. Always knew we had relations, in particular the Jurasich whānau here. Came to Kerikeri to buy oranges, occasionally play rugby, attend marathon Anglican church services. But the value more recently of being in this part of Northland, after they closed the Kaitaia airport, thank you Air New Zealand, has been the ability to enjoy not only a great quality of life, but proximity to your local airport, which no doubt you remember I funded on your behalf. You may now clap. Thank you very much. However, Winston said, now look Shane, when you give this speech, please be pithy, and always bear in mind that a speech to Northlanders is enhanced by a display of humility. At which point I advised Winston there's 63 years of DNA which causes me to bridle against that. But I got the message last time, Northlanders, the last election in 2020, and there was an enormously difficult election to fight for our party because of COVID and a variety of other things. But if there's one of you in this room, there's 100 of you in this room, we want Shane to see you without the angry voices, not necessarily wearing the hat, leave that to Matua Dover Samuels, and come and talk about the gritty issues that cause people angst here in Northland. You know, as well as I do, when you cast your vote 6 months to the day, in October the 14th, you already know what you're anxious about. You already know what you're apprehensive about. You already know what your aspirations are. But the sad thing is we have a political culture and social culture now that does not reward people for speaking out. That causes people to bury their criticism or to couch the language they use when they disagree with a proposal, an idea, a policy, because they don't want to be accused of either being prejudiced or bastions of white privilege, other such rubbish. I want you to know that I will never shy away from dealing with the hard, gritty, in some cases, very frightening issues that do confront us in the North. I want you to think that the education that I've had, the background I represent, are more than capable of being a megaphone for Northland. We know that the trajectory and the pathway that we're on is one that fills us with great alarm and unease. Let me just choose a couple of issues that have been raised by yourselves with me from time to time. The more the current government or other parties take services out of Northland, whether it's collapsing all of our tertiary institutions, our polytechs into one global body, whether it's closing down local representation in our DHBs and having one central body, all of that from Northland and regions represents surrendering to the Wellington Triangle. Wellington, unless we have ways of ensuring that regions have the ability to influence the quality of outcomes we have on the ground up here, we will be and continue to be thought of as a neglected province. It's essential that the voices we send to politics, but most importantly, the way we conduct ourselves as advocates of Northland, do not surrender to the bureaucracy of Wellington. If you have any doubt whether or not the bureaucracy of Wellington is a threat, hands up those of you who live in Kerikeri and are very worried about the arrival of Kainga order housing down the road. And I tell you, stand up and fight for that. Let me tell you what's going to happen there. You think, given that the character, the demography, the quality of this small township, rooted in its missionary history, its horticultural history, early Māori church history, we are on the verge of Kerikeri becoming the new Bronx like Rotorua and Tauranga. And unless we challenge the central bureaucracy who decided that it's cool to just dump a whole lot of houses in Kerikeri with no social assessment, they don't bother consulting us, they call it drop-in. Well, drop-in sounds like drop-ins. The fecal matter of a cat, a rat or a dog. And that is what we're going to see in the future if we don't have power back in our regions or very strong voices here out of Northland, the Bay of Islands and indeed Kaitaia. That's not to denounce the importance of housing, no, but don't arrive under the cover of night, impose something in our local neighbourhood because the existing community has rights. Those of us who invest of our lives, our capital, our children's experiences in a community deserve to be treated with the utmost respect and deserve to be involved in any decisions that's going to unalterably change the character of our local town. And I tell you, on your behalf, I'm up for that fight. Before you tolerate one more speech about light rail, bikes over the harbour bridge, a new harbour bridge, tell your politicians fix the veins and the arteries of our existing transportation system so the goods and services that earn us international revenue, that earn us foreign exchange can function, as opposed to these pipe dreams. There will never be light rail in Auckland for as long as there is New Zealand First in Parliament. They are saying that it's going to be 30 billion. It will be 60 billion if you use as a budget equivalent in relation to the project that's already over budget and exploded in costs. We don't need vanity projects like that when the export-rich, revenue-generating regions of New Zealand are struggling because of decrepit roads. We need to get our priorities right. The regions are massive producers of foreign exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, any nation that does not have foreign exchange goes bankrupt. So focus on getting back along with me to the basics of running an economy. I've just, as you know, Winston and I, along with Dover and other people that have served in public life, we're very proud of our ancestry. Winston, as he says, the Scottish Māori, myself, the Dalmatian Māori, and Dover. I'll let him explain his own genealogy to you another time. But we have the soil and the blood of the North coursing through our veins, and we stand for Northland, no particular subgroup. And I can take you down the road, 8:30 in the morning, talk to the whānau, you will not find a single family that is tossing and turning about anything other than the cost of living, the quality of education, the devastating impact of truancy, the crippling state of our health system, and what are most of the Māori in Parliament, in politics, talking about? Co-governance. We need honest and transparent governance before we need co-governance. I'm going to tell you something about co-governance. That was never an idea that originated in New Zealand. That came from the United Nations. And I was one of the few parliamentarians when that issue was being taken by John Key, the ACT Party, and Dr. Peter Sharples to New York, who bitterly opposed it. I said the United Nations has got no business importing its conception of how democracy should be modified to deal with Indigenous rights. Those issues have to be settled amongst us, the sovereign people of New Zealand. And it's deeply ironic that the current group of Māori politicians, and indeed the Labour government, has decided the best way to showcase iwi governance or iwi leadership is to put them in a position where they're responsible for the nation's sewage system. There's something deeply ironic and offensive about that. So in the event that we wash back up on your behalf in Parliament, not 1 ounce of energy is going to be expended by me doing anything to maintain that ideology of co-governance. It is a threat to the functioning of democracy. It is a major diversion of energy, of intellectual capacity from day-to-day Kiwis, day-to-day Māori whānau. I'm going to tell everyone that we need to put the K back in iwi. We have such inordinate challenges when you consider the difficulties New Zealand faces in the world. A resurgent, very, very active China, and America with very difficult domestic difficulties, but a lot more activism in the world. And New Zealand next to Australia, who has now put its colours on the mast of a nuclear submarine. Those are deep issues, challenging issues that require the entirety of our nation to be of single mind, single purpose, and indivisible citizenship. We do not have the luxury of playing games by bringing the Treaty of Waitangi, whom I'm a beneficiary of. I'm a great believer and supporter of our heritage and indeed the culture who makes me who I am. But I do not accept victimhood. I do not accept that the antisocial behaviour that I see amongst my nephews in the gangs, irrespective of the gang's name, is due to colonisation. It's due to disinformation. That is a crutch. That is a recipe served up by a tiny elite who are miles away from the daily grind of our local people who work either at Waipapa Timber, Mount Pokaka Timber, or around many of our businesses here in the Bay of Islands. Folks, please join with me. I know a number of you have said, oh, it's all very well you talking like this, Shane, because you've got your Māori whakapapa and you speak the language. No, these are ideas. These are ideas for building a deeper sense of what it means to be a Kiwi, building a sense of cohesiveness and purpose that we desperately need in New Zealand. I've never ever seen the country so polarised and so prone to divisive techniques, divisive feelings. I can quite easily blame the current government, and naturally I do. You know, if there's one thing that annoyed me is when Jacinda used to say, this is a captain's call. Well, they had to get rid of her because she nearly capsized their waka. The difficulty for Chippy, who's taken over, is that waka is holed below the waterline, which is bad for them but good for me. Thank you very much. On the question of what to do with education, if there's a ticking time bomb, if you want to know what's the quality of society tomorrow, look at how robust, look at how well endowed the current generation of youth are to deal with the challenges that stand in front of them. I'm a product of a well-developed education system. I caught that escalator. My mother, a school teacher, my dad, a farmer, my grandmothers, very steeped in their church, steeped also in the land. They invested time and energy. Education is the escalator. It is not to be diverted away from through these other matters of ornamentation. I mean, I don't know about you, and I speak Māori, but I've had a guts full of all these government organisations with their Māori names, especially when the quality of service they deliver for Māoris is worse. They're better off staying with the old name. But why have we tolerated this ornamentation? Winston and I were very, very much doubting Thomases about it. That's not to put the Māori language down, but if the content of the quality of the service is getting worse, then whatever name you use, Russian, Ukrainian, Dalmatian, Maori or English isn't going to make any difference. We have to go to the pith of the issue. And the pith of the issue, folks, is that we have in New Zealand this thing called the social contract. The social contract means I have my rights. But before I practice my rights, we have obligations and duties. And I've got to tell you, I see too much evidence in the north where we've got this social culture, in some cases feral culture. They have no interest in obligations, zero interest in duties, but they all want take. We need politicians from the north or governments who are going to challenge that. And when I have challenged it, they say, oh, you don't understand, you're making victims out of people that are the casualties of colonialism, of colonisation. No, I want you to take personal responsibility for your ratchet behaviour, and I want a system that rams home the costs to the parents and the ram raiders. A number of you have spoken to me. Shane, what are we going to do about this subset of very dysfunctional, dangerous youth culture evidencing itself through ram raids? Well, for as long as the court system, the police aren't empowered, and politicians don't treat it as a deadly serious issue, we're going to be blighted with it. And that's before I even get into talk about the nets and the gangs. Don't worry, if I have my way, we're bringing the type of policing they have in Queensland. Where over there, when the Queensland police turn up, the gangs literally poo their pants. That's the sort of co-governance I want. We have got to get back to people accepting the consequences for dangerous behaviour. Now, you know as well as I do, you can kind of separate yourself in the north from that type of feral culture. But in actual fact, you can't. If we don't stand up against it, it will intrude into businesses. It's already intruding into neighbourhoods. And we're dealing with a culture amongst a whole host of young men and older men and some women who say they're a part of the community but refuse to abide by the rules, the obligations and duties of being in the community. I say enough is enough. Stop the excuses. Stop the rationalisation of victimhood. Stop using the treaty as a crutch to excuse bad behaviour today, and stop taking the Treaty of Waitangi into policies where it's got nothing to add. As I said, what on earth possessed Labour to decide to deploy the treaty in enhancing the ability of the nation to manage its sewage? Deeply ironic. The thing that I'd like to finish my speech on is just remind us what Northland actually enjoyed for the period of time that Winston and myself were in politics. Kerikeri and the north, other areas of Northland, it didn't happen by mistake. No one goes to Wellington and all of a sudden is able to command not only a $3 billion fund, but infrastructure investments through shovel-ready as well. Full marks to Winston, who, when we went into the coalition negotiations, was extraordinarily well prepared. Now, there are a number of people in Kerikeri who say to me, oh, but you people made Jacinda. You created her in 2017. They forget about your second cousins, the 400,000 National Party voters who crowned her in 2020. They forget about the wives and husbands and farmers who all thought it was a great idea to vote for Jacinda and to give her and Labour an astonishing, unheard of victory in MMP environment. Those are the people who crowned the Labour Party. Those are the people who made the Labour Party into the creature it is today that has left us a hell of a lot worse off than where we were. Now, how do you turn that around? Well, as I said, we've all got an opportunity to cast a vote. And we who are going to seek your votes need not only to humble ourselves, but to show that we can stand and deliver. I will put the track record up of New Zealand First and Winston against any other politician, past or current, in terms of what we have delivered for Northland. You know, I'm not entirely sure. I see Jeppo here from Kaipara. Greetings, Kaipara Mayor. Don't worry, at the end of this speech there won't be a karakia. But he is looking at solar energy. We are looking at solar energy north of Kaitaia. We need to break out of the strictures that have held Northland back. There will be no opportunities for new industries in Northland unless we can control the cost of energy. We have the ability to probably create another power station at Ngāwha, $250 million worth. But that will never happen until the grid, the transmission capacity of Northland is enlarged. There's not a hope in hell that Labour or any other party is going to do that. So I pledge today that in the event we are blessed with the opportunity to deliver again, we will find the $100 million, we will build the upgraded transmission, we will work with our energy company, Top Energy, and the one in Whangarei, because you won't have new industry, you won't have new manufacturing, you won't have new jobs if people find that coming north is number one, a problem for getting adequate labour, but most importantly, the ability to run a business efficiently with efficiently priced energy is just too hard. It's that type of infrastructure that you can rely upon New Zealand First for. It's that type of infrastructure that shows we've got to be practical. I don't know about you, but I've got zero tolerance for these shrill voices around climate change. My whole approach to climate change is the volatility of weather is worsening. But then I came from a fisheries background. I understand there's two major weather systems in the Pacific. There's La Nina and El Nino. And each of them throw god-awful weather at New Zealand from time to time. We have to invest in ensuring we can adapt our lifestyles to change that. Because whether you cull every cow from Kaitaia to Dargaville, you're not going to change the emissions of China, India, or America. And please don't allow our country to be bankrupted as a consequence of shrill voices who would have us close down half of our agricultural industry, close down our extractive industry, and hollow out our manufacturing base. Hawaii is a great place to go to for a holiday, but I don't want to see New Zealand turned into a form of Hawaii without Pearl Harbor and the American military. We have got to continue to maintain vigilance through adapting and coping with the changing climate. Yes, it is important that we do our bit internationally, but let's not overplay our ability to change the global trajectory of climate emissions. There's 5 million odd of us, and we are probably smaller in size than a number of the Australian cities. Our main objective to you, to our kids, to each other, is to ensure we have a robust economy that generates a surplus to pay for the quality of life that we're taken for granted. So yes, we're not going to diss everything to do with climate change, but we're going to focus on adaptation. The reason why Gisborne didn't completely flood, and I'm told this by Gisborne people, is because the stock bank that the Provincial Growth Fund paid for prevented the flood from breaking through. In parts of Hawke's Bay, those stock banks hadn't been redeveloped. They hadn't been strengthened. The mayor from Kaipara will tell you that the stock bank work that we've paid for in Dargaville has enabled them to enjoy greater resilience. The money that went in to help the farmers in Ruawai, although the local ACT member from Ruawai will deny it, he was one of the guys who asked for the money, go figure. Those are the interventions and the investments that we must make that are of a practical character. In relation to our economy, and I'm going to wind up here, our economy is still a commodity economy. And whilst the test is to continue to find ways to add value, encourage more high-value tourists, to do that, we need practical change on the ground. We don't need any more consultants. We don't need any more working parties. One of the greatest failings I saw with Labour when we governed with them is they brought a lot of slogans, but they had no way of executing or implementing. Remember Kiwi House, Kiwi Home, Kiwi Build? Whereas New Zealand First, everything we said we were going to deliver on, we did. The military, the $3 billion into the regions, just to mention two. The significant contribution that New Zealand can make of a practical nature in foreign affairs. New Zealand First is a party of action. It has the ability, it has the knowledge, and quite frankly, it's got the courage to make the bureaucracy do what the elected members of Parliament damn well wanted to do. Now, that does come with some risks. Consequently, I have been investigated by the Auditor General Department many times, but they've yet to get me. But that comes as a consequence of demanding accountability from Wellington and not surrendering all of our ideas that disappear into Langton Triangle. I want to talk just a little bit about the Waitangi Tribunal. The Waitangi Tribunal, folks, obviously I'm Māori, so I know quite a lot about this through my professional career, my involvement in my own people. The Waitangi Tribunal was set up in 1975. In 2 more years, it's going to be around for 50 years. I want you to think back, 1975, 50 years back. That takes you back to 1925. Do you really think that our antecedents would have ever imagined we'd spent 50 years trying to make sense of the Treaty of Waitangi in the modern world, whilst we have inordinate problems with negative social statistics for our Māori youth, not only in RAM rating, not only in education, not only in housing, and yet we continue to fuss over, fret over, obsess over the Waitangi Tribunal and the Treaty of Waitangi. The high tide mark for the party I belong to in terms of the treaty and the Treaty of Waitangi Tribunal has come and gone. There should not be a Treaty of Waitangi Tribunal after 2025 other than half a dozen people in a room cleaning up outstanding matters, and even by that time, hopefully the Ngāpuhi claim will be dealt with if I'm the minister. I can tell you that right now. I won't be putting up with these hapus jumping up and down, going round in circles. You hear that, David? Now, a number of you have asked me also to talk about what is the best way to ensure that when a group like Kāinga Ora come to town, that it's done in a respectful, professional manner, and it integrates what they're trying to achieve with what the existing community hold important and valuable. Number one, it is wrong to accuse anyone in Kerikeri of opposing the delivery of housing for people who are in a housing dire situation. But firstly, any government department comes to town, like a place in Kerikeri, we cannot afford to have Kerikeri turned into Rotorua, where every motel is like a ghetto, where streets are so dangerous that the police from time to time, you begin to wonder whether or not they want to go there. So I do hope that those of you who are concerned about it do organise a big meeting at the Turner Centre and get people like myself to turn out at that meeting. Because when we change and look at housing solutions, they have to be integrated. There has to be a social assessment. There has to be absolute confidence that a place like Kerikeri, which has enormous problems with its existing septic system, existing wastewater system, can cope with a large infusion of new people. That's not about white privilege. That's not about racism. That's about people who have vested interests, who have their capital, their life savings invested in a neighbourhood that they jealously protect. That doesn't mean that other people shouldn't come here and live, but it does mean, Kāinga Ora, you don't come like a stray dog. Kāinga Ora is one of these organisations, as far as I'm concerned, has been unwisely given a Māori name. Kāinga Ora is meant to be the living house. Well, I tell you what, get that wrong, there'll be no Kerikeri Ora. We need to absolutely challenge, and I'm up for that task, what they're trying to do. Other people are struggling to create property outcomes in Kerikeri because of problems with wastewater and that sort of infrastructure. Don't shy away, folks, from intervening. Don't shy away, folks, from standing up for what concerns you about the viability and, quite frankly, the sustainability of the town that you love, the town where your children live, the district. Now, this is going to be a vexed issue, but it's an issue that cannot be avoided. It has to be dealt with very, very firmly, full on, if we're to avoid the calamity that has befallen Rotorua. Once the Vegas of tourism, now the Bronx. Not a good outcome. I want to finish up with why in 6 months' time you should back Winston and I. When you go in to the ballot, when you go in and post into the ballot box your vote, you're able to do that in such a way you can give full expression to all of the anxieties, as I said, the hopes and the fears. No one's going to know what you've done, no criticism, because one thing that's wrong today with political culture, if you are a dissident, if you have a different view, whether it's to do with freedom and liberty, you're immediately derided. And that's very dangerous in terms of open discourse in New Zealand. So cast that vote, knowing that people like myself and Winston, we're here to do the business. We're not here to talk. We're people of action. And if you doubt it, look around the north. Water storage, roads fixed, railway invested in, marine infrastructure. For those who have children or grandchildren, mokopunas and kerikeri, the money spent at the Domain, the money spent at building the new Waipapa Sports Centre along with Far North District Council, the money spent at the roundabout, the money spent at the Puketuna roundabout. Everyone in this room remembers how dangerous that road was. Many of us have actually been there after accidents where people have died. Those were delivered by us. Those were delivered because we took a risk, we acted with boldness, and we would not take no for an answer. And then ask yourselves what's happened in the last 2 years. No, seriously. Social culture has deteriorated. divisiveness has worsened. People feel afraid. People feel alarmed about their inability to articulate what's really happening in their neighbourhood. For fear either of being cancelled, for fear either of being demonised, or for fear of being estranged and disenfranchised socially and politically. If you're looking for a voice to articulate those anxieties or those hopes, look no further than our leader Winston Peters, our party New Zealand First, and your favourite Northlander as of tonight, Shane Jones. Okay, folks, I'm advised that there is an opportunity for questions, so I think most of the questions will be answered by Winston.
Look, we're going to have question time, but it means question time. There are far more than 100 people here, Shane. There's over 200 people here, if you add next door as well. And if somebody takes 5 minutes for their question, that means possibly 3 others won't get to ask theirs. So if it's a question time, please stick to the rules. I know our educational standards have fallen these last 30 years, but let's revive them. So ask the question, and if Shane and I can't answer it, without all the bull dust that goes with it sometimes when you're in politics, we'll tell you before it's patently obvious. Who's got the first question? Yes, madam.
Over here.
Hang on, no. I'm the chairperson still. Ladies first. Manners, yes sir.
David Seymour said that you knew about the Kerikeri report. I always believed you didn't.
David Seymour said I knew about the Hey Poor report, and you always believed that I didn't.
Yeah.
Well, you're an honest person, and that's the answer. You know how you got all the evidence for that?
By reading
Because
Facebook.
Willie Jackson said, we didn't show him because guess what he'd have done if he'd got hold of it? That's my bona fides. Mr. Seymour, your party and National and the Maori Party went off to sign up to the UN Declaration on Indigenous Rights, something that I ensured that Helen Clark agreed not to do when I was the Foreign Minister. I've hardly gone and they're doing it. So don't go around, and I can say it in this context, Mr. Seymour, flim-flamming some country folks. Next question. Yes sir, you're next.
What's your estimate as the length of time we're going to be importing Indonesian coal to power our EVs?
That's an extraordinary, honest question. It's utterly amazing that these people in government now are so obsessed, and so are the Greens, with their myopic view of the world, then rather than use our coal, which is essential, because coal is essential to still keep our power system going. No, they're importing inferior, much worse coal in terms of the environment. And I'm asking the question, what are the media doing about this? So the answer to your question is, that depends on, sir, how you vote on the 14th of October. Yes, sir.
Quite a lot of the detractors go on about how you went with Labour instead of National, and I think it's quite unfair. Would you like to explain to us what actually happened when you went to the coalition?
Shane alluded to that at the end of his speech, but let me say, the question over here is, it's often said that you, Winston, and your party went with Labour in 2017, and you're the one that's responsible. You all got that statement?
Yep.
Well, I just want to give you a quick snapshot of history. It's 1996, the first MMP election, and the party with the balance of political responsibility is New Zealand First. And somebody who'd sacked me twice is on the phone wanting a conversation, namely Jim Bolger. Now, over here, Dover Samuels knows that's precisely right. And of course, you're sitting there and you know, no matter what you think, no matter what your grievances might be, there's something bigger than democracy. Your country needs an election to end up with a stable government. That is the number one demand being made upon you. Otherwise you negative the purposes of democracy. And so we had to set aside our distaste. You know, sacking somebody twice is not a very happy circumstance, especially when it's utterly not justified, as proven by the historic record. But the point was, Helen Clark was talking to me from the other side with Jim Anderton, but she could not get Jim Anderton to say he would back the government, underwrite the government, to guarantee confidence and supply. He wanted to have the right to make up his mind as time went along. And the moment my party found that out, all 17 of us, we said we've got nowhere else to go. We've got to go back and talk to Jim Bolger. And that last 24 hours we said, but when we go back, we're going to demand 10 more big things first. Real big things. Like the gold card. Like free medical visits for old people to doctors and things like that. Or, for example, pay parity for primary school teachers. There are thousands of getting pay parity in primary schools today because of a party called New Zealand First and our preparedness and readiness in these negotiations. Anyway, so now we're in government, Jim Bolger. But they never told me, the National Party, that there was what the Aussies call a spill-on. There was a revolt against Bolger being led by somebody called Jenny Shipley. Right under the current, under the radar. And hardly got going in government, and it was effervescent, it was sizzling away there. Then all of a sudden they rolled Jim Bolger, and he came in one day to me and he said, look, they're trying to roll me. History's amazing, and I know that some people here don't want to give me to give a history lesson, but I said to him, Jim, if you stare her down, she's gone. She'll be gone. Because as soon as I get in contact with the branch elected chairman of your own party, for what she's trying to do, she'll be a good night nurse. But he didn't have the guts to back up what I said. Now I've got a new person I'm having to form a government with called Jenny Shipley, who wasn't in any way competent or ready to do the job properly. Full stop. Take you forward to 2017. The party got the most votes was National. We had our first discussion on coalition talk with them. And we go into the room, me and this little team here, and Bill English is the leader, the then Prime Minister, and he asked me, Winston, can I see you over here by myself for a while? He takes me over there and he says to me, she says she's got the numbers, but she hasn't. He's talking about Judith Collins. And all I can see is Jenny Shipley and Jim Bolger. Something that's already happened to me. You shake hands with one person, Bill English, who I got on with pretty well, but he's going to be rolled because the National Party wants to get the coalition, they're going to change their leader. Well, that's not the way the election ran. You voted in 2017 for Bill English to be your leader, if you were voting National, not Judith Collins, as was profoundly improved by 2020. Now, you got a long answer, that TV's on, and I hope we'll hear that for the last time. Thank you very much. Next answer, next question, yes sir.
Can you give us a quick rundown on Three Waters and the RMA reforms?
If you can find anybody in this world to give you a quick rundown on Three Waters and the RMA reforms, then I'm getting out of this job now. Because it's not Three Waters, mate, it was always Four Waters. You know what the fourth one was? Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining. It's not 4 waters, now it's 10 waters. But it's still the same. Still the same plan, still the same cynicism. Because in the end, I'm sorry, like Shane and I come from a Maori background as well. We think the water comes from God, comes from heaven. We think the oceans do too. And we are not against sharing them. That's the point. But as for the RMA reforms, well, there are no RMA reforms at this point in time that are set in coal, that are in concrete. And don't forget who passed the RMA legislation. It was National in 1991, not Labour. Labour wrote it, but National passed it in 1991. It pays to be around a while, remember who's the guilty party here. But if you're saying going forward of what has to be done, well, what has to be done is to ensure that people do not lose their rights to their own local values, their own local development, and their own hopes for the future. And if you think Northland, wrapped up in whangarai, is going to give Northland a fair go, you have got to be joking. And that's the latest plan they announced just 24 hours ago. And here's the rub. 2 days ago, Hipkins was saying co-governance is over. The day later, the minister in charge, Northlander, was saying it wasn't. You make up your mind. It's all there in black and white. So, I can see why you asked the question, Mike, because basically at this point in time, it needs some serious work and practical people who, when they speak to you, don't come along with a whole lot of financial crap and bull dust and try and convince you that you were going to pay $5,000 per home in rates more for water, and now it's going to be $2,600. And when you ask them for the figures, for the analysis, they haven't got any. Like light rail. Light rail started off at 1.9 billion. Then it went to 8 billion. Then to 16 billion. It's now past 30 billion and still going. Or, as Shane was mentioning, they come up to Auckland the other day and they announced 5 alternative plans for an alternative crossing of the Auckland Harbour. 5 alternative plans, all interchangeable. All linked to what? To the light rail plan. The light rail plan has not even started. It was going to be finished in 2021. See what I mean? You need better journalists and better reporters to tell you the facts that are behind this case. But it is a serious issue, and we will, as a former lawyer, I have to tell you, I'm as worried about the RMA as you are. One question for Shane, please. Yes, sir.
Yes, a lot of people in the healthcare industry lost their jobs because of the vaccination mandates. What is your stance on that?
My stance on that, the question is, a lot of people lost their jobs in the health system because of the being mandated out of it because of the vaccination policies at that time. We have been we're getting ready for the Soccer Women's World Cup. We've been through the Rugby World Cup for women. It's a fantastic result. We're trying to revive tourism in this country. We had the Scottish singer Stuart down at Mission just a week ago to a packed audience. No one's wearing a mask at the rugby, or the cricket, or anything else. But all of a sudden, in this circumstance, they are still imposing the old rules and saying to people, you will never be allowed back into your profession. And we are short thousands of people, thousands of nurses, all sorts of specialists. My answer to you is this. Go and ask those authorities imposing that malicious policy, Nazi-like, about the imposition of mandating rules. How do they explain trying to get 42,000 into Eden Park? No masks. You can't reconcile those two because they aren't reconcilable, and it's time to move on. Yes, sir.
The Kiwi Bank have put out an award for the most promising young New Zealander, and it happens to be someone from overseas, and it happens to be someone who's a male prostitute or something. Has Kiwi Bank executives actually fucking bad, or me fucking what could go wrong?
I've always subscribed the view that the government has no business in the nation's bedrooms. All right? The government has no business in the nation's bedrooms. Let them live as far as I am concerned. And that has subscribed well to democracy all these years. But the person you're talking about wasn't born here. That person came here when they were 13 years of age, about 9 years ago, from Fiji. So, apparently our immigration policy worked because now he's, according to Kiwi Bank, the young New Zealander of the year. He does have views alternative to your own. The difference about my party's approach and the approach of so many others, if we don't like somebody else's point of view, We allow them to give that speech in a hall that's empty. We don't try and stop them speaking. The alternative that you're facing though, they don't like other voices, and their response is not to say, I'm turning the phone off, I'm not reading the newspaper. No, they're saying, we're going to stop you expressing your free will and expressing your opinion in a democracy. And our answer to them is, if that's your idea of a democracy, you go back to where you came from.
I'm sure Winston will have a view about this as well. The Reserve Bank, what is our view in relation to how they're coping with inflation? The Reserve Bank fueled inflation first, also driven right up to the last budget by Labor with a massive giveaway. Now they're manufacturing a recession. The question you've got to ask yourselves is, do they have a social license or a mandate to do that? Is there not a way of, over a longer period of time, managing the effects of coming out of COVID? I'm horrified by the prospect of how waywardly the Governor of the Reserve Bank talks and openly admits in a select committee that in order to save the patient, you and I, the New Zealand economy, they basically have to euthanize us first. They do not have the social license to create that level of havoc. They've made the job of Grant Robertson a lot more difficult, which is music to my ears. Okay, any more questions? Yeah.
Tell us what a woman is.
Okay. Sorry, Winston's pulling rank. The question from down the back is, hey Jonesy, what's a wahine? Tell us what a woman is. Winston's racing forward like a first fight.
No, it isn't that, but we had a discussion. Sam and I had a discussion about that 24 hours ago. And I got written to by Family First, actually, asking me that question. I thought, is this extraordinary? I mean, I can recall coming across the corridor of Parliament one day, and Jenna Lynch asked me that stupid question. She said to me, are you a feminist? Now, as much as I would like to be, I can't be, can I? But that's the kind of moronic question that they think is academically sound. But what's a woman's? Well, adult, male, female, and my mother was one.
Okay, any further questions? I would say, what is a woman is she who launched 1,000 ships in the story of Troy, but I'm reluctant to say that because her name was Helen. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Which I suppose is better than Karen. Okay, any other questions? Look, if I can thank you all for coming along, if I can acknowledge Carol Jurisic and my beauty queen Dot for helping, and Julian, the president, for putting this together. There are some pamphlets. We do need volunteers. If you want a megaphone that knows how to deliver with a proven track record, hundreds of millions into the north, not on vanity projects, on actual infrastructure that's going to enhance our quality of life. And if you want someone who will take no step backward in dealing with criminality, with gangs, with the ongoing onset of antisocial behaviour, it's not going to change, folks, unless we stand up and say enough's enough. We're just not tolerating any more excuses, victimhood ideology. We want a quality of life where businesses can flourish, investors can make a return, people can go about their God-given business on any given day without drama. And most importantly, we need a champion for the North who will ensure we get what we're entitled to, and we will turn that opportunity into long-term durable wealth, cohesiveness, and a greater quality of life for Northland. Thank you very much for turning out. One thing, for those of you who ate the food, I have been warned you can't hold a political meeting and have people eat food, because that might cause the authorities to think by having a free sausage roll you were tempted or corrupted to vote for Shane Jones. I know you buggers are mean-spirited. It'll take more than a sausage roll to win you over. But please take the pamphlets, please take the material, and please help me win for New Zealand First, the seat of Northland. Kia ora, thank you very much.